Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be really diving deep into the world of artificial intelligence. Specifically, we're going to be dissecting this book, AI Snake Oil. Have you ever felt like people throw around these AI terms and nobody really knows what they're talking about?
It's a bit like calling every form of transportation a vehicle. Like we're talking about everything from bikes to spaceships. You wouldn't know if someone's, talking about their commute or a mission to Mars.
Exactly. And that's kind of the problem we have with AI right now. It's such a broad term. So how do we separate the hype from the reality? And this is really what AI Snake Oil tries to do, right?
Right. And they focus on two main types of AI.
Okay, so let's break those down. What are those two types?
So we have generative AI and we have predictive AI.
Okay, so generative AI. Now, this is where all the buzz is, right? We've got ChatGPT writing poems. We've got DALL-E creating, like, these wild images. I mean, it feels almost magical, doesn't it?
It is impressive, yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, generative AI isn't actually new. It's been in development for over 80 years.
Really?
Yeah. So that ChatGPT poem you mentioned, it took quadrillions of calculations.
Quadrillions?
Yeah, drawing on patterns from mountains of text data.
Wow. Okay, so maybe less magic, more just like massive computing power.
Precisely. It's really a testament to decades of gradual improvement.
So it's that refining process,
Yeah.
really. Okay. Interesting. Now let's talk about the other one, predictive AI. This is where things get maybe a little unsettling, right? I mean, we're using AI to make these really big decisions about things like loans, who gets hired for jobs, even predicting criminal risk.
And this is where I think the snake oil really comes in. Because the book argues that, despite how widespread the use of predictive AI is, there's surprisingly little proof that we can actually accurately predict these future social outcomes.
Wait, so these really high-stakes decisions, they might be based on shaky predictions.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about election predictions.
Okay.
We've all seen those go wrong. Dewey defeats Truman.
Right.
Or even, in Hollywood, you have studios rejecting, like, Star Wars because they didn't think it would be a hit. Predicting human behavior, even with tons of data, is really, really difficult.
So you're saying even with all our fancy algorithms, we're still pretty bad at predicting the future, especially when it comes to people.
Yeah, especially when it comes to people.
And it reminds me of that study, what was it called? The Fragile Families Challenge, right? Where they tried to predict these long-term outcomes for, like, thousands of children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the researchers, they used something like 10,000 data points.
10,000?
For each child. Yeah, they had family background, socioeconomic factors, even teacher evaluations.
Wow, so they threw the kitchen sink at it, all that data, and they were trying to predict things like GPA, even whether a child's family would, face hardship in the future. So I'm guessing the AI just aced the test, right?
Well, not quite. That's what's so interesting about the Fragile Families Challenge. Even with all of that data, and they used really cutting-edge AI, the models they created barely outperformed, like very simple algorithms.
Really? So what happened? Was there just not enough information?
It's more nuanced than that. I think what it really highlighted was just how inherently difficult it is to predict human behavior. Life is messy, it's unpredictable, people adapt, circumstances change. It's really hard to capture all of that in an algorithm.
Okay, that makes sense. So predicting who's going to win an election or, how well a child is going to do in school, that's incredibly complex. But what about, like, simpler predictions, like who's likely to repay a loan? Surely AI can handle that, right?
Even then, it's not as straightforward as you might think. You see, one of the major pitfalls the book highlights is the difference between correlation and causation. And this difference actually tripped up some researchers who were studying pneumonia risk. And the results were kind of shocking. So these researchers, they were using AI to try to predict which pneumonia patients were more likely to have serious complications. And surprisingly, the AI actually concluded that asthma patients were less likely to have problems.
Wait, hold on. That doesn't sound right. Doesn't asthma, make respiratory illnesses worse?
It does. But this is where the AI got tripped up. Because in the data that it was trained on, asthma patients were often, sent straight to intensive care, right, as a precaution.
Okay.
And this actually meant that they had fewer recorded complications.
Yeah.
Even though, in reality, asthma increases the risk.
So the AI saw the correlation, right, asthma patients, fewer complications, but it totally missed the actual cause and effect, that asthma makes pneumonia more dangerous.
Exactly. It's that old saying, correlation does not equal causation.
Right. Right.
And this is a huge problem
Yeah.
because, if that AI model were used to make like real world decisions, it might send asthma patients home thinking, oh, they're low risk.
Oh, wow.
And so it's just this stark example of why understanding that difference between correlation and causation is so important when it comes to AI.
That's a chilling thought. Makes you wonder, like, what other ways might predictive AI stumble? What about those automated hiring tools, the ones that analyze resumes and even like video interviews?
Yeah, those are a prime example of another challenge with AI, which is that people, they figure out how to game the system.
Oh, you mean like those SEO tricks that people use to get their websites to the top of search results, but for like job applications.
Precisely. Yeah. So some job seekers, they're optimizing their resumes, even, their appearance in video interviews, to appeal to these algorithms, even if it doesn't reflect like their actual skills or experience.
So instead of showcasing their real talents, they're kind of tailoring their application to what they think the AI wants to see.
Exactly.
That feels, I don't know, kind of dishonest.
Well, it highlights a key problem, which is that when AI systems are opaque, right, when we don't know how they work, people try to manipulate them.
Yeah.
And we saw this play out on a huge scale with that Dutch welfare fraud scandal.
Oh, right, right. That was the case where an algorithm wrongly accused like thousands of families of fraud.
Thousands of families, yeah.
It's just a devastating example of AI gone wrong. How could an algorithm get things so wrong on such a massive scale?
Well, so the algorithm, it relied really heavily on factors like nationality, and it made these really flawed assumptions, and this led to like systemic bias. Essentially, it created a guilty until proven innocent system, but with these really, really devastating consequences.
And it was thousands of families wrongly accused and, many of them driven into financial ruin. It's heartbreaking, and it makes you realize like the very real human cost of just blindly trusting these systems. It's like anti-snake oil is this warning. And we can't just assume that AI is objective or neutral, right?
Yeah.
We have to be so aware of the potential for bias.
Absolutely. I think that the Dutch welfare fraud scandal is just this really stark reminder that over-reliance on AI without proper oversight can have these really, really devastating human consequences.
Okay, so we've talked about predictive AI, we've talked about some of its pitfalls, but what about generative AI? Because, the creative potential there seems huge, even if it's, not as magical as some people might claim.
Yeah, generative AI definitely has some really, really exciting possibilities, but it's not without its challenges either. And I think one of the biggest ones is its tendency to get things wrong, sometimes in very subtle ways.
Okay, so even though like ChatGPT can write this really convincing essay or DALL-E can create, this stunning image, it can still make mistakes.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's important to remember these systems, they're trained on these massive amounts of data, but they don't truly understand the world the way that we do.
Yeah.
Right. So they can produce, a grammatically correct text or they can create a visually realistic image, but they might get facts wrong, or they might even create outputs that are, biased or misleading.
It's almost like that game of telephone where a message gets like distorted as it's passed from person to person, except with AI it's patterns and data being remixed, not whispered words.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. And this remixing can lead to some serious problems, particularly when you think about things like misinformation and deepfakes.
Right, deepfakes, those AI generated videos that make it seem like someone is saying or doing things they never actually did. That's pretty scary stuff.
It is scary stuff. And as generative AI gets more and more sophisticated, it's getting easier and easier to create these really, really convincing deepfakes. And so you can imagine the implications for, spreading propaganda or even creating like non-consensual explicit content. It's a real concern.
It's almost like generative AI is this like double-edged sword. You have this amazing potential for creativity on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's a tool for creating incredibly convincing lies. So how do we even navigate that?
Yeah, and that's where, critical thinking and media literacy becomes so important. We need to be much more discerning about the content that we consume online, especially as AI-generated content becomes more and more prevalent.
It's like we need to develop this like whole new set of skills for navigating this AI-driven world, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And AI snake oil also talks about how AI can be used to like centralize power and worsen these existing inequalities, right?
That's right. That's a really crucial point. As AI becomes more and more integrated into our lives, we have to ask ourselves, You know, who is developing these technologies?
Right.
Who is benefiting? And who might be left behind or even harmed?
And one area where this is playing out in a really big way is social media. So can AI actually solve these problems of, hate speech, misinformation, harmful content, all of that on these platforms?
You know, the book actually dedicates a whole chapter to this.
Hmm.
And the answer is it's complicated. One of the biggest hurdles is context. AI often struggles to really understand the nuances of human language and social situations.
So it might flag a post as like inappropriate because of certain keywords, but totally miss the bigger picture.
Exactly. The book actually gives this example of a father whose Google account was shut down because the AI mistook photos of his sick child for child sexual abuse.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So the AI saw like patterns that were associated with abuse, but totally missed the context, that this was a worried parent seeking medical advice.
Exactly. And that's a problem called context collapse. And it happens all the time on social media. It's why satire and humor are so often misinterpreted by AI. And it's why AI-powered content moderation can be so inconsistent and frustrating.
And it's not just context. It seems like people are constantly finding ways to like outsmart AI-powered content moderation. It's like this technological arms race, right?
It is. And the book actually calls this algo speak. It's essentially like coded language that people use to evade these AI filters.
So it's like a digital version of like Pig Latin, but for like discussing sensitive topics online. Give me some examples. How are people using this algo speak?
Well, I mean, think about it. People might use euphemisms or creative spellings, to talk about things that could get flagged. So, for example, they might replace the word drugs with like drugs or medication to try to avoid detection. Or they might use, coded language and inside jokes to discuss, sensitive topics without triggering the algorithms.
That's pretty clever. But it also means that AI is constantly playing catch up when it comes to content moderation. It's like this never-ending battle.
It is. And it really highlights the limitations of relying solely on technology to try to solve these really complex social problems that we see on online platforms.
So if AI isn't this like silver bullet for social media, what are the alternatives? AI snake oil seems to advocate for like a more balanced approach, right?
Absolutely. The authors argue that while AI can definitely play a role in content moderation, it should be used very cautiously and transparently, and importantly with human oversight and really clear appeals processes. They also stress the importance of addressing like the root causes of harmful content, which often goes, way beyond what AI can detect or control.
So it's not just about like flagging the bad content, it's about trying to foster a healthier online environment overall.
Exactly, yeah. It means thinking about things like platform design, algorithmic amplification, and really, the incentives that drive the spread of harmful or misleading information in the first place.
Speaking of incentives, the book also tackles like this deeper, almost philosophical question. Is advanced AI an existential threat? Like, are the robots going to take over the world?
It's a question that captures a lot of people's imaginations, but I think the book takes a more nuanced and ultimately, I think, a more reassuring view.
So no need to worry about killer robots anytime soon.
Well, the book argues that AI's power is really rooted in the technology that we create and the ways that we choose to use it.
Right.
It's not about AI becoming super intelligent and deciding to destroy us,
Yeah.
It's about how humans might misuse or misdirect AI's capabilities.
So it kind of circles back to those core themes of AI snake oil, right? It's this hype versus reality, critical thinking, and then ultimately responsible innovation. So it's less about like this AI versus humanity thing and more about AI as a tool, a tool that we can use for good or for ill.
That's a great way to put it. And and it really raises the question of, well, how do we shape the future of AI responsibly? And AI snake oil offers some really interesting ideas. One that really struck me was this concept of embracing randomness.
Embracing randomness. That seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it? I thought AI was all about like finding patterns, making these accurate predictions.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive, but the authors argue that in situations where AI predictions are just inherently unreliable, using what they call a partial lottery might actually be a fairer and more transparent approach.
Right now, you're going to have to explain this whole partial lottery thing. Like, how would that even work in real life?
Because imagine you're trying to allocate some kind of limited resource. Maybe it's spots in a really prestigious school or a life-saving medical treatment.
Yeah.
Instead of relying solely on AI to predict, who's most likely to succeed or who would benefit the most, you would set these really clear eligibility criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe based on certain academic achievements or medical needs, and then you use a random selection process, but only within that eligible pool.
So instead of like relying on an algorithm that might be biased or inaccurate, you're introducing an element of chance to try to make things more fair.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A partial lottery acknowledges that predicting these complex social outcomes it's really hard even for AI. So it's about finding a better balance between this data-driven decision-making and just ensuring equal opportunities.
It's almost like we're saying, okay, we recognize the limits of what we can actually predict, and we're building a system that accounts for that uncertainty.
Right.
I like it. AI snake oil also challenges another one of those common assumptions, which is that regulation stifles innovation. Especially when it comes to something like AI that's moving so quickly.
Yeah. And the authors make a really, I think, compelling argument that well-crafted regulation can actually provide a framework for responsible development and innovation in AI. It's about ensuring that AI is used ethically and that it ultimately benefits society as a whole.
So it's not about like holding back progress. It's more about like steering it in a positive direction.
Exactly. Yeah. Regulation can create these guardrails that protect against potential harms while still encouraging the development of AI that really serves the common good. It's about finding that sweet spot where innovation can flourish without compromising our values.
It's about finding that balance. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into AI snake oil, what's the key takeaway you hope our listeners, walk away with?
More than anything, I think this book is a call for critical thinking. It encourages all of us to look beyond the hype, and engage in a more informed and nuanced conversation about AI, about what it can really do and what it can't. AI is a powerful tool, but it's not a magic solution.
It's up to us to shape how this technology is developed, how it's used.
Yeah.
And we need to be aware of the potential benefits, but also, the risks, right? And we have to keep asking these tough questions about how AI aligns with our values.
The choices that we make today are going to have a profound impact on the future of AI and its role in our lives.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, as you navigate this increasingly AI-driven world, remember to be curious, be critical, and stay informed. Ask questions, challenge those assumptions, and don't be afraid to dive deeper. The future of AI is really in all of our hands.